In this video, I'll show you how to build this amazing custom Netflix style carousel in React.js. So basically I'll be using React.js and plain CSS to build this entirely without using any library support. So let me first give you a demo of this project. So first of all, as you can see, if I hover on any of these cards, there is a cool overlay effect where we get some additional information about that specific card. And you'll notice when I hover away, there is no overlay anywhere. But the moment I hover on the carousel, you can see I get an overlay over here as well, indicating that we can go to the right hand side. So if I click here, you see it smoothly scrolls towards the right. And now you can see there is a right arrow as well as a left arrow, indicating that we can also go to the left. So if I keep clicking the right arrow, you can see we keep going right. And then once we reach the end, the right arrow disappears, but the left arrow still remains. And if I now click on the left arrow, you can see we keep going towards the left. Now the right arrow is also visible. And if I keep going left, more left, then you can see once we reach the starting position, the left arrow disappears, but the right arrow is still present. So this is pretty similar to the Netflix carousel that you find when you open their homepage. And you can scroll horizontally through the list of movies that are present and displayed categorically. So this, I feel, is pretty similar to that, and you will also learn how to build all of this on your own using React.js and plain CSS without any external library support. So without any further ado, let's get to the building part. Alright, so this is where we are going to code our project. So basically I just opened stackblitz.com and I just opened a React project. So here you can see we have the default React.js project setup where there is an app.js, an index.js and a style.css. So here in the app.js is where we are going to put all our logic, and in the style.css we are going to add the styling part. So first, the way I like to proceed with building things is I like to first build out the UI. And then once the UI is properly visible to me, then I start to add the functionality part to it. So first, let's start constructing the UI. So what I'll do is, within this div over here, what I'll do first is, before adding any child elements, I will first give this a class name of nothing but carousel container. Alright, and then after that, I will, before I add anything over here, I will first go to the style.css and I'll give a few default styles over here. For example, I want the entire margin to be 0 by default and the padding to be 0, as well as if I go to the app.js, actually I'll name this nothing but carousel page, and I will copy this, paste that class over here, and to this class I will give it a background color of, let me first select black, but I won't exactly give it a background color of black. Instead, I will just make it slightly grayish. So I'll maybe leave it somewhere over here. All right. Actually, let's make it a little more grayish right there. And then I'll give this a min height of, let's say 100 VH and a padding of 2 rem. All right. So that's going to make our entire page this slightly dark grayish color. Give it a min height of 100 VH and a padding of 2 rem. Now if I go to my app.js, and over here within this div, I will create an h2 tag, then write inside this h2 tag, I'll write trending now. This should also be capital. Then I'll give this a class name of nothing but carousel title. Alright, so you can see trending now is visible over here. Then after that, I can actually proceed to create the entire carousel layout. But before I do that, I actually need the data file. So because in the final demo, if you remember, we were mapping through all of this data. So we would need a data file for this, which contains all this information. So what I'll do is I will go over here, create a file named data.js, and I'll paste some data over here and I'll save this. So here you can see this is nothing but an array of movies, which contains 10 items, and each of them have an ID, title, category, and an image. Alright, it's pretty simple and self-explanatory. Then I'll go to my app.js, and here I will simply import nothing but movies from ./data.js. Alright, that's it. Now I'll create the carousel layout. So first I'll create a div, and this div will have a class name of carousel container. And within this entire carousel container, there are going to be multiple things. Basically, there's going to be the left and right arrows, which comes up when we hover on the carousel. Then there's going to be the entire content of the carousel. Then there's going to be overlays and so on. So first, let me actually add the carousel itself. So here let me just create some more spacing here. So here I'll create a div. Then to this div, I'll give a class name of nothing but carousel wrapper. All right. Then within this carousel wrapper, I will create another div that will have nothing but a class name of carousel track. So carousel track and wrapper are pretty much the same thing, but the carousel wrapper is going to be the outlined part, like this entire part, whereas the carousel wrapper is going to be this an inner scrollable part. All right, you'll soon get the idea of that. So right after this, within the carousel wrapper, what I'll do is I will iterate through the movies array. So movies.map, because let's just start to display things out. So movies.map, for each movie, I will actually render out a div over here. All right, now each of those carousel items will have nothing but a class name of carousel item, just like that. And within this, let's construct the individual carousel cards. So this will have nothing but a div, and this div will have a class name of nothing but movie card, which will contain nothing but an image, and the image will have an src. Sorry, my bad. So the image will have an src, which will be nothing but movie.img. Then it will have an alt tag of nothing but movie.title, and lastly it will also have a class name that says movie-image. Alright, so now you can see each of those images are rendered. Now let's just leave this as it is. We also need to add the overlay part within this, the overlay which comes on top of the image when we hover. But before I add that, let me just go to the styles part and let me just style out all these class names. Alright, so let's just go to the styles.css part and style these class names. So first I will take this carousel title, then I'll paste that here, and to this I will give it a color of white. You can see this is visible now. Then I'll give this a font size of 1.5 rem, then a font weight of nothing but bold, then a margin bottom of nothing but 1 rem, and lastly a font family which I'll just paste in over here. Or wait, instead of pasting in, I can just use this one right over here, and you get this nice font family. Alright, then after this I will select the carousel container class. Let me just also save this file. Alright, so I'll select the carousel container, then I'll also style that. So this will have nothing but a position of relative. That's all, because afterwards within this carousel item, I'm going to add the div overlay, so that when I hover on this, I can see an overlay on top of the image. So for that, let's just keep the carousel container as position of relative. All right. Then after this, I'm actually going to style nothing but the carousel wrapper. Let's take that, paste it over here. So the carousel wrapper will have nothing but an overflow of hidden. So when this scrolls, so we can have a fixed width for the carousel container and it doesn't overflow out of it. Then after that, I am going to select the carousel track. There you go. And to this, I will simply give it a display of flex, because I want all of these to be in a row-like fashion. So now if I scroll, you won't see the other images. All right. And then to each of the carousel item, which is nothing but these parts over here, basically the individual cards, what I'll do is I will give it a flex of 0, 0 and 20%. So basically a flex basis of 20% and flex grow and shrink of 0, 0. So flex basis of 20% will make sure that each of these cards will always be 20% in size with respect to the carousel container. And then I'll also give it a padding of 0, 0, 0.25 of 0 and 0.25 rem. Alright, so with that we should almost be able to see our cards in the carousel like fashion, but to do that we also need to set the size of this image, right? Because it's taking the full width right now. So the next thing to do is to style the movie card over here. So I'll paste that right over here. Then the movie card is going to have a position of relative, because within the movie card especially, we're going to add the overlay like right over here. So this needs to be relative as well. Then this will be relative to the container as well. So position of relative, and then an aspect ratio of nothing but 16:9. So this will, as you can see, it will always ensure that there's going to be a preferred aspect ratio for the box, which will be used in the calculation of auto sizes and some other layout functions. So it will always keep the height and width of the individual card responsive every time we change the width. So after that, I'll give this a background color of nothing but some sort of a black, and then a border radius of 4px, and then an overflow of hidden, and a cursor of pointer. Alright, and then after this, I will target the movie-image, which is nothing but this part, this image over here. And then to that, I'll give it a width of 100% and a height of 100%. And then I'll also give an object fit of cover to each of those images, so they look more better and high in quality. Alright, so with this, you can see our carousel has formed. So each of these movie cards, they have an aspect ratio of 16:9, and the image is taking the entire 100% width and height of the movie card, which has an aspect ratio that resizes itself based on the available width of the container. Alright, so now we just need to find a way to go left and right through this carousel. Like at this moment, I'm not able to go to the right side or move to the left. So now we need to add the functionality for that as well. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, so now let's just go ahead and create the left and right buttons for when we hover over here. So what I can do is I'll go to my app.js. Then right here within this carousel container itself, I will create two buttons. So a button tag. So here's one button tag and here's the other button tag. So this first button tag is going to have a class name of nothing but, let's say, nav, then button, and then nav button left. Alright, so this is going to be the left button. Similarly, I'm going to copy this, paste this here. Then this is also going to have the nav button class, but here it's going to have nav button right. Alright, then I need to display the icons, the left and right icons. So for that, what I'll do is I'll actually install a library called Lucid React just to add the icons. So what I'll do is I'll write import, then here I'll write chevron left and then chevron right from Lucid React. So here it says install the package Lucid React, which I'll do. Then now we should have the package installed with the left and right icons. So then I will actually copy this over here. I'll go within this left button and I will paste chevron left and I'll give it a size of 24. So here you can see the chevron left icon. Similarly, I'll copy this, paste this here, get the chevron right and paste that here. Alright, so now we have left and right icons. Now the next thing to note is I want this icon to be visible on top of these two overlays and only when I hover on them. So what I'll first do is I'll actually go to the style.css and I'll style these class names. So I'll go to style.css, then here I'll paste the nav button and I'll quickly give it a position of absolute. And this is exactly why we had given the carousel container a position of relative, because based on the container of the carousel, the left and right buttons are going to be put over here. They're going to be absolutely positioned. Alright, then I'm going to give this a height of 100% so that these icons take the entire height. Then I'll give this a z index of 10. You can see the icon is present over here. Then I'll give this a background, which is going to be nothing but an RGBA, where these values, the red is going to be 0, the green is going to be 0. Basically, it's going to be a shade of black with a 0.5 opacity. Alright, something like this. Then after that, I'll give this a color of white. So the icon itself gets the color of white. Then I'll give it a border of none, then a cursor of pointer, then a padding of 1 rem, and lastly I'll also give it a transition, because when I hover on the carousel, I want this to be visible, and I want it to have a transition when it becomes visible. Like I want it to be visible in a smooth way, not just abruptly. So I'll transition the background color, which basically controls the visibility or opacity. So background color should be visible with a 0.3 seconds ease effect. Then to get that into action, I will select the nav button and the hover pseudo class. Then here I will simply add a background of RGBA. Then here everything's again gonna be 0, and this is going to be nothing but 0.7. Alright, so you can see when I hover, there's this nice transition effect. Alright, you see how it changes its color. Then now let's give the left and right their style so that they go to their individual positions. So I'll just go here, I will copy this right over here, and I'll paste it here. This is a class. So to the left button, all I'll do is I'll give it a left of 0, which is pretty self-explanatory. Then a border top right radius of nothing but 4px, and I'll copy this, paste it here. Then border bottom right radius of 4px as well. Similarly, I'll copy this, paste this here, change this to right, and change the right to 0. Alright, voila. Now you can see the left one's right over here and the right one's right over here. Now with that done, we need to quickly add the remaining functionalities where these buttons should not be visible initially. They should be only visible when I hover on them. So what I'll do is I'll go to the app.js, and right over here I'll start creating some of the functionalities. So I will first create a variable called const current index. Basically this is going to be a state. So current index, then state, then set current index, and this is going to be a state, and it's going to be initialized with the value 0. So let's import this just like that. So why do we need the current index? Well, basically if I go to the final build, the one that I showed you in the demo, so over here you can see right now the first index is visible, right? When I move to the right, the first index is hidden. So once I click on the right button, the index becomes 1. From 0 it goes to 1. Similarly, when I click here again, the index goes to 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. But when it reaches 5, it means we have also reached the last position in the viewport, because by default we are trying to show 4.5 or 5 images. So the moment the index reaches 5, it means it indicates that we have reached the last position of the carousel. So that's why we need this current index to help us to serve as an indicator for how many carousels or how many cars we have swiped through. Alright, because this is going to help us ensure some of the things, such as once the current index is at the end, basically more than 5, basically 5 or more than 5, then that means we should not be showing the right arrow anymore because we have reached the end. Similarly, once the current index is 0, which means we're at the beginning, then at this point we don't need to show the left arrow because we can't go left, we can only go right. So this is going to help us do all of those things. So similarly, after this, I'm also going to create another variable called is hovered, then set is hovered. This is also going to be a use state, and it's going to be initialized with a value of false. Now this is pretty self-explanatory. We need this to trigger or toggle the visibility of these two left and right arrows whenever we hover on the carousel. Alright, now after that, I'm actually going to take this is hovered, and to this button itself, I am gonna do something like this, and I'm gonna add is hovered. If is hovered is true, then only then I want to make the left one visible, and similar with this as well. If is hovered is true, then I want the right to be visible as well. So now let's just quickly toggle the left and right index. So now let's just quickly toggle the left and right arrows based on when we hover, because we have now added this condition, so it's not pretty much visible. So what I can do is in the carousel container itself, right over here, I can access the mouse on mouse enter property, and here I can say nothing but whenever we enter the carousel viewport, set the is hovered state to nothing but true. Similarly, I'm going to copy this, paste this here, and this is going to be on mouse leave. So every time we leave the carousel container, set this to false. So now if I just hover, you can see I get this to be visible, right? And if I hover on this, it transitions. Alright, so now with that done, there's another thing we need to do, that by default when we are at the starting position, I don't want the left arrow to be visible by default, because I can't go any left. I can only go right at the beginning. So I only want the right to be visible, right arrow to be visible initially. So what I can do over here is, if is-hovered is true and the current index is less than movies.length minus 5, only then make sure the right button is visible. So initially, because the movies.length is always 10, so 10 minus 5 is 5. So the current index, which is 0, is less than 5. Initially, it's always less than 5, right? So in that case, when I hover, I want the right arrow to be visible, because so until the carousel has not reached the end, we want to keep showing the right arrow. But once it has reached the end, we don't want to show the right arrow anymore. And because at one go we are showing 4.5 or 5 elements, so once the current index is less than movies.length minus 5, which means 10 minus 5, which is 5. So if current index is less than 5, keep showing the right arrow every time we hover on the carousel container. Once the current index becomes equal to 5 or greater than 5, do not show the right arrow anymore, because it means we're at the end. So right now, if I hover, you can see the right is visible as it is, but we need to make sure the left shouldn't be visible. So if I just add over here that until the current index isn't greater than 0, then make sure the left shouldn't be visible. So current index, if that's greater than 0, only then make the left arrow visible. So basically in the initial position that I'm in right now, I can't go left anymore, right? Because I'm at the start. So that means whenever current index is 0, do not display the left arrow, only display it when the current index is greater than 0 and I'm hovering on the carousel container. Alright, so that's what this does. So if I hover on this, you can see only the right one is visible, not the left one anymore. Alright, now after that, let's actually add the logic for when we click on the left or right arrow, so that we can scroll this carousel the right way. Alright, so now I'll actually add an on-click listener to each of these buttons. So first I'll write over here on click. Similarly, I'll paste that right over here as well. And over here, I will actually create two methods. So handle next. First is the handle next. Then after that, I'll also create another function named nothing but handle previous. Alright, this is to go to the previous item in the carousel. Then I'll add the handle next function to the on click of the right arrow and the handle previous to the on click of the left arrow. Alright, now these two will pretty much have quite a similar logic. So let's first add the functionality for handle next. So one thing that I need to do is, when I click on next, basically when I click on this arrow, I want to make sure that this carousel scrolls towards the right by one card item. So when I click here, it should scroll and this card item should become invisible, like it should go to the left. Alright, so this part should go to the left and the carousel should start from here. So to do that, I would actually need the individual width of each of these cards based on the carousel container. Alright, because the width of the cards can always change based on the responsiveness. So I want a real-time way to figure out the width of each of these cards based on the carousel container. Because if I figure out the width of one card, then I can make sure that I scroll when I click on this right arrow by that width amount. Alright, so I hope that makes sense. So if it doesn't, you'll soon get to know what I'm talking about. So here, to figure out the width of any UI element, we use something called nothing but the ref. Basically because we want the dynamic width of that element on any size, right? So for that, we can use something called the ref. So I'll create something called carousel ref. This will be equal to nothing but a use ref, and it will have a default value of null. Let's import use ref from over here. Alright, and I will actually give the carousel track over here nothing but a ref of carousel ref. Right, so basically by attaching the carousel ref to this carousel track div, basically this entire part, we now can get the width of the entire carousel track div. Then we can just divide it by 5 to get the width of each of those elements, basically the card elements. Alright, so what I'll do over here is, in the handle next, I will first write if the carousel ref dot current is not present. If it's false, then just return. Then over here I will write const item width. Basically this will hold the width of nothing but that individual card. So const item width is nothing but carousel ref dot current dot offset width. This is going to give me the entire width of this entire carousel track. And because we want to show almost near to 5 elements per view, so because we want to show 5 elements per view, so whenever I scroll on every view, we want to show almost 5 or 4.5 or maybe 4.7, which is almost 5. So 5 elements per view. What I can do is I'll take the entire width of this track, then I'll divide it by 5, which should give me the width of this card over here. Alright, and then I can make sure that I use this item width to translate on the x-axis towards the right hand side, or basically towards the left hand side, because we want this to become visible, right? So when I click this should become visible and it should start from here. So it should translate to the left. So don't worry, you'll understand what it means. And I'll also create another variable named max index, which is going to be equal to movies.length minus 5. Alright, so we want to only scroll past 5 times at max because we have 10 items. And by the time we come to the 5th index, that means the last item would also be visible on the viewport. So we don't need to scroll right anymore after that. That's why we are also going to use the max index. So now I'm going to write a check. If current index is less than max index, until then we can keep pushing to the right, which means we can keep translating towards the left. So I'll write set current index, and this is going to be nothing but previous plus 1. So I'll update the current index, and then I will target the carousel ref dot current dot style dot transform, because to use the translate x to move an element to the right or left, basically translate x is what helps us move an element to the right, left, or rotate it, right? And translate can be used only if we have the transform property as well. So carousel ref dot current dot style dot transform equals nothing but translate x, and here I'll give this a negative value because we want this to go this side when we click here, right? We want this part to be hidden. So translate x and then a $sign. Then here I'll write current index plus 1 because we updated current index over here. But if we access the current index right in the next line itself, and because use state is kind of asynchronous in nature, we won't get the updated value of current index right here. This will still be 0. Right? This won't be the updated value here. This will still be 0. So we again have to use current index plus 1 over here. Alright. So carousel ref current style transform, translate it in the x-axis, basically move it on the x-axis with a negative value of current index plus 1 multiplied with the item width. Alright. This should be capital. Alright. So initially this is this. When I click here, this will become 1 into the item width. So it will move towards the left by this amount. Alright, and I'll also give this a px value. Cool. Now if I actually click here, let's see what happens. There you go. You see, it is moving as we expected. Alright, there you go. Now there's still obviously a few more things to do to make it more smooth and so on. But this is basically moving it as expected. If I refresh, you can see if I click here, it moves by almost that entire card's amount. Now I guess because there's some padding on the left and right, so that's why it's not exactly covering this entire part. So if I also actually add the padding amount over here, it's actually going to completely move this entire section, because there might be some padding over here. That's why when I click on the right icon, there's still this much part left, because when we are translating towards the x with this width, the padding, it's going to start from here because the padding starts from here. So basically this much distance is still going to be left over here, because we are actually translating through this exact width value, but we are starting from here because of the padding. So this much is still visible when we click on the right arrow. Don't worry, we can tweak around with the values or find how much padding we have given to the left and right and add that over here to fix that. But we'll do that in the end. Alright, so now for the handle previous icon also, as you can see now, once you have moved to the right, if I hover, the previous icon is also visible. So for the handle previous, I'll actually copy this entirely over here. It's going to be pretty similar. Then here I'll remove the max index, and instead here I'll write if current index is greater than 0, then until then we should be able to move towards the left. We should be able to move towards the left side. Once current index is 0, the left icon gets removed, so we won't be able to move to the left side anymore. So in that case, we also need to add -1 over here. That's all we should have to do for the left part, for the previous part. So let's just check that out. So if I click the right icon over here, we go to the right. If I click on the left, we go to the left. All right, so that also works perfectly fine. All right, so now after this, the next thing we need to do is, if you notice, if I click on the right, and you can see this abruptly moves to the right and left. It doesn't transition properly. I want this to basically go in a smooth way to the right or left. So to do that, it's going to be pretty simple. Remember, we are targeting the translate X property when we move to the left or right. So here in the styles.css, I'll actually go to the carousel track over here, which is the entire track over here. And here I'll add some style. So why are we targeting the carousel track especially? Because the carousel ref is put on the carousel track, and that is what moves the carousel right and left, right? Basically it translates it to the right or left. So to the carousel track itself, on the container, I want to give it a transition, and I want to target the transform property. So transform, because that's what we are targeting to translate. I'm going to target the transform property, and then I'm going to give it a 0.5 seconds of ease out animation. So now if I actually click on the right, you see it smoothly goes to the right. If I click on the left, it smoothly goes to the left. Perfect, right? Then after this, another thing we need to do is we need to add an overlay on each of these cards when we hover on them. So to do that, that's also going to be pretty simple. I'm actually going to scroll down right to this carousel item, then the movie card. Then within the movie card and right below this image, I'm going to create a div. Then this div is going to have a class name of movie overlay. Then after that, I'm going to create another div within that movie overlay div, which is going to have a class name of nothing but movie info. Then after that, I'm going to create an h3 tag. So h3, sorry, this should be here. And then here, I'm going to write nothing but movie.title, and I'm going to copy this, paste this here. I'm going to write here movie.category, and this is going to be a p tag over here as well. Then to the title, I'm going to give it a class name of nothing but movie-title. Then similarly to the p tag, I'm going to give it a class name movie-category. Alright, now we just need to style all these individual elements. So I'll first copy the movie overlay class. I'll go down, paste this here. Then to the movie overlay, I'm going to give this a position of absolute because I want it on top of this card. And if you notice, the card already has a position of relative. So absolute, then I'll give it an inset of 0. So the inset of 0 is going to basically set the top, bottom, right, left and all that to 0 within this div itself, so that the overlay is positioned perfectly right above this div itself. Basically absolutely positioned above this div itself. So after that, I'm going to give a background of linear gradient. So I'm just going to paste in some styles over here. So right over here, I'll paste this linear gradient, which as you can see gives us this effect. Then I will give this a display of flex, and then an align items of flex end, and then an opacity of 0, because by default I don't want that overlay to be visible. And then a transition where I target the opacity and I make it visible with a 0.3 second ease effect, and then a border radius of 4px. Alright, now I need to target the dot movie -card on hover. So when I hover on the individual card, I want to target the overlay and I want to make it visible. So when I hover on the card, I want the overlay, I want the overlay to be visible, so I'll give it an opacity of 1. Now if I hover, you can see it gets visible, and you can see this amazing transition. Now let's style the text within the movie card overlay. So I'll go down to the movie info class, give this a padding of 1 rem and then a width of 100%. Alright, so if I hover, you can see it looks like this. Then after that, I will actually select the movie-title. This will have a color of white, then a font size of 0.8 rem, then a font weight of 600. These are pretty self-explanatory. Then a margin where everything will be 0. So basically where the top and right are going to be 0, the bottom is going to be 0.25 rem, the left is going to be 0. Alright, then the line height of 1.2 and a letter spacing of 1.4. Right, if I hover on this, you see, looks a little better. But then after this, I'll also style the .movie-category, and to this I'll give it a color of slightly whitish gray, so E5, 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 and then a font size of 0.5 rem, then a margin of 0, then an opacity of 0.8, and then a line height of 1.4. I should actually change this letter spacing to 0.3 px. Alright, then after this, if I refresh and I hover, you can see this is how it looks. Looks much better now actually. So if I actually expand this and I hover, you can see it looks so much better. Now, one more thing to do is, I think that's the last thing we need to do. That's basically if I go over here to the app.js, as I said in the video, that when I click on the right, you can see there's this small space over here. Basically, it's not going right entirely. Well, that's because there's some padding over here on the left side, where when we move to right and we move right by this item width amount, it goes to right starting from here. So from here plus this width, so it takes up somewhere around this much space, which leaves this much space empty. So if I remember correctly, the padding was somewhere around, if I go over here, actually if I open this up in a new tab, I'll just run this project, and here if I actually inspect, say I go back here, I inspect this card over here. Alright, so here if I go to the top, you can see there's some padding to the left and right. The padding is of 1 rem. Let me select this. Sorry, the padding is of the carousel item. There's a 0.25 rem padding to the left and right. So how much is 0.25 rem exactly in px? If I click this, it's somewhere around 4 px. So 4 px to the left and 4 px to the right. But you can see for the first element itself, there's 4 px on the left, 4 px on the right, and this element also has a 4 px to the left. So it's going to be 4 plus 4 plus 4, which is 12. So 4 px to the left and right 4 px. Then this element has also 4 px on the left hand side. So 4 into 3, 12 px. So just notice what happens now. If I open this and I go over here, then just notice what happens here. If I, let's say, give here 12, because 4 px and then 4 here and 4 here, so 12. So now basically if I move to the right, you'll see that that card is completely vanished. Not even that tiny portion is visible, and that will also happen if I put 8 actually. So 4 px from here, 4 px from here, plus this entire width of the card. That is how much we want to go towards the right. So if I do that, you see the first card becomes invisible, but there's still this much space remaining because I did not put 12 here, but I put 8 instead. And I put 12, then this 4 px of this card would also have been accounted. So I think we can just tweak around with this value, and let's give it something like 16. That should pretty much do the trick. So now if I go to the right, you see that card is gone completely, and a little bit of this card is also gone, which is fine. And now if I keep moving to the right, you see we get the last card as well. So if I move to the left completely, and let's say if I remove this and let's say I save this, then let's see what happens. First of all, this doesn't completely get removed, and also if I move to the end, you can see the right arrow is gone, but the last card isn't completely visible yet. That's a problem, right? That's why we can give an extra value over here of 16 as we just saw, and that would pretty much solve everything. So now if I move to the right, you see it moves, and then when I reach the end, this card is also completely visible. Similarly, if I go to the left, this works perfectly fine as it is, so we don't have to do anything over here. So now if I actually open this in a new preview mode, now you can see this is how our final project looks like. It looks pretty cool, to be honest, pretty much like Netflix. And if I click on this, it moves to the right, to the right, to the right, and you can also see the last card. And now once we reach the end, the right card vanishes, but the right arrow vanishes, but the left arrow is still visible. So if I click here, we go to the left. Now the right and left arrows both are visible. I can keep going to the left, 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 and we reach the first card. And the left arrow has also vanished. So this is pretty much all about this project. This is how you build a custom carousel, which pretty much looks like Netflix with amazing transitions and scroll effects, all on your own without using any library. So that's all for this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.